Today, we're going to crack open a case file on a crime that, honestly, should never have happened. We're doing a deep forensic dive into the absolutely audacious 2025 Louvre heist. It's a robbery that didn't just shock the world, it kind of insulted it with its stunning simplicity. So, let's start the investigation.
4 minutes. That's it. Just think about that. That is the total amount of time the thieves spent inside the world's most famous museum, a place that's supposed to be a fortress. 4 minutes is all it took. And in that tiny window of time, they walked out with over $100 million in jewels. So the big question, the one that this whole case hinges on, is pretty simple. How on earth was that even possible?
All right, let's start by setting the scene. Act 1, the crime scene. The date is Sunday, October 19th, 2025. The Louvre has only been open for about 30 minutes, which is a time that investigators like to call managed chaos. You know, crowds are pouring in, guards are distracted. It's the perfect cover.
Their plan was just brute force, but it was guided by some seriously surgical intel. It was basically a 3-step dance. First, they used a cherry picker to completely bypass all the ground floor security and go straight for one specific vulnerable window. Second, they pull out angle grinders, super loud, super messy, but incredibly fast, to smash right into the display cases. And third, poof, they're gone, just melting into the Paris morning on a couple of scooters.
And right there, that's the key, the unsecured window. I mean, you don't just show up to the Louvre with a cherry picker on a Sunday morning and hope for the best. No way. You come because you know. You know exactly which window has no alarm. You know which camera's not looking. This wasn't random at all, it was a targeted hit. And that is our first major clue. This had to have inside help. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece of evidence, the loot itself. Act 2, following the evidence. You see, what they took, and maybe more importantly, what they left behind, tells a totally different story from what you saw in the headlines. Right away, the media and the prosecutors, they just jumped on one thing. The thieves dropped the crown of Empress Eugenie on their way out. So the official story was set. These guys were just a bunch of clumsy amateurs. But were they really? Well, this right here just completely blows that amateur theory out of the water. Look at what they ignored. Stuff like the Regent diamond, absolutely priceless pieces that are so famous you could never ever sell them. And now look at what they took. 19th century jewelry. Why? Because its value isn't in the history, it's in the raw materials. They didn't steal art. They stole hardware. And this points to a very clear, very professional motive that law enforcement calls break and melt. The goal was never to hang these things on a wall. It was to tear them apart, recut the gemstones, melt down the gold, and then just sell off the untraceable bits for quick cash. This is a business transaction, not a clumsy smash and grab. So if they weren't amateurs, then who were they? Let's move to Act 3, profiling the suspects. And this is where the case gets really contradictory. The official story that the prosecutor pushed was that this was a JV team. You know, just a bunch of petty criminals from a local neighborhood. They had some minor theft on their records. And yeah, they were pretty sloppy. They left DNA all over the place. It was a really convenient narrative, politically. Made it sound like a fluke, not some massive failure of national security. But wait a second, there's a giant hole in that story, right? How does a crew of low-level local thieves get the kind of surgical insider intel you'd need to pinpoint one single unalarmed window at the Louvre? The two halves of that story just don't add up. The only theory that actually fits all the evidence is what investigators started calling the hybrid theory. See, this wasn't one group, it was two. You had the low-level, totally expendable crew to do the actual robbery, the muscle. But they were being guided by a high-level plan from someone else entirely, the brains. And this is the guy who connects those two worlds. The prime suspect, linked by DNA, is a man named Abdoulaye N. He's a social media star, famous for urban motocross, which explains the getaway scooters. But check out this last detail. This is the Rosetta Stone for the entire case. He used to be a museum security guard. He's the perfect link. He's got a foot in both the criminal underworld and the museum's inner circle. But knowing about Abdoulaye N actually blows this case wide open and points to a failure that is so much bigger. A failure that, honestly, it's so bad it sounds like a punchline. So let's get to Act 4, the smoking gun, where we find out who the real culprit was. So who could have given them such a perfect, devastatingly simple blueprint for this robbery? Who was the real mastermind here? You're not gonna believe this. The keys to this entire $100 million heist. It wasn't a person. It was a password. Louvre! Yep, that was it. The password to the museum's entire video surveillance server was LOUVRE. This wasn't some brilliant hack. It was a cyber-physical attack that was made possible because the digital front door was basically left wide open with a key under the mat. With that password, an insider could just log in remotely, confirm that the camera on that specific window was turned away, and give the crew the all clear. And look, this timeline shows this wasn't a single slip-up. This was a full decade of institutional failure. All the way back in 2014, an official audit specifically called out the password Louvre and warned that it could, quote, facilitate theft. But for 11 years, warning after warning was just ignored. They were too busy with more attractive projects. And the best part? Those crucial security upgrades were scheduled to be finished in 2032. And this chart really shows you what that kind of negligence looks like. By 2024, a staggering 61% of the rooms in the Louvre had zero video surveillance. None. The thieves weren't just lucky, they were operating in an environment where the odds were just overwhelmingly stacked in their favor. So, where does all this leave us? Let's get to the final act, the verdict. I mean, the thieves were caught, but is this case really closed? Well, first off, the prognosis for getting those jewels back is basically zero. Because of that break and melt motive, they're gone, forever. The stones have been recut, the gold has been melted down. I mean, statistically, something like 90% of stolen art is never seen again, and for jewels, that number is pretty much 100%. And the Louvre's reaction to all this? They immediately announced a massive €80 million security plan, right after the heist. It's a textbook case of closing the barn door after the horse has bolted. And it's basically a silent admission of guilt. They're now spending a fortune to fix the exact problems they were explicitly warned about for over a decade. Which really just leaves us with one final nagging question. The guys who smashed the glass have been charged, sure. But when a disaster like this is enabled by a decade of documented, ignored warnings, who is truly accountable for losing a national treasure? The guys who broke the window or the institution that left it unlocked for them?